morning, value viewers. This is Talking Point on WESN, your content capital. WESN, we entertainment, sports, and news. The only place, the best place for local content in TNT, broadcasted in HD. Sean Michael Small, Hair Sans, Keaton Shaw, my co-host, hashtag Free Keaton Shaw. However, on the horizon, the chains may be broken and Keaton may soon return to us, but we await for that day. However, what has returned recently, yesterday it was announced that the Cabo Star is finally back in operation. The first sailing is scheduled for today at around 2 p.m. with a return sailing coming in later this evening, I think around 11 p.m. Now, this is good news for Tobago and for Tobago businesses and suppliers and distributors in particular, as well as, of course, those other businesses further on the supply chain that rely on those supplies. Because at the end of the day, the landing craft, the Emprendedora, excuse me for my pronunciation, did not have the capacity. However, it's not entirely clear how long we will have that second landing craft, which could potentially help deal with the backlog. However, the backlog is a relative thing because certain goods, particularly foodstuffs which were perishable, well, the window to sending them to Tobago is probably over or potentially over. We'll have to wait and see how that works out. But in my mind, I would think to have potentially both vessels running concurrently, it might not be necessary based on logistics. But what is interesting is that Tobago SMP Shamfa Cujo, she said that there is discussions for acquiring a new cargo vessel, or potentially the language that was reported was with regards to consultation on the specifications for working on building a vessel to suit our needs. That's interesting. The critics or the cynics might say, well, government's track record and implementation might make this more complicated than it should be. However, we'll wait and see how all of that unfolds. But just happy that this period with uncertainty with our cargo vessel is not necessarily going to be as long as it was previously back in 2016, 2017, when the superfast vessel was had its own controversy and eventually departed our service. So now, for more on what's been happening over the last 24 hours, let's kick off the daily review. And what might just be one of the biggest stories coming through the news cycle yesterday, although I believe this was a judgment delivered last week. Justice Devendra Rampasad basically denied the Financial Intelligence Unit's request into information on accounts of one Gary Griffith and his wife Nicole Dyer Griffith. Basically, the long and short is the judge's reporter have said that it seems more than just coincidental that the claimants may have been singled out for investigation through the request for information shortly after the published criticisms of the first claimant in his role as Commissioner of Police at the relevant time. That is to say, after the criticisms of Gary Griffiths. Whether it was done legitimately through police investigations leading to a production order under the Proceeds of Crime Act, or by the FIU of its own violation, has not been established on the evidence, and the courts will be unwilling to speculate on this regard. This is because essentially they did not seem to have any suspicious transactions reports or suspicious activities reports. So the judge is basically asking, why are you making these requests? Because it seems as though you don't have enough evidence to infringe upon the rights of privacy of one Gary Griffith and his wife, who just coincidentally happen to be political opponents of the current administration. The optics, unfortunately, matter. Usually when you have a situation like that, you want everything above board. So you want to do things, you want to cross all your T's, you want to dot all your I's. So when you're making a request like this, it's similar to why you can't just have your phone tapped, or sorry, The government cannot just tap your phone, so they're not supposed to. There's supposed to be some evidence or procedure that they have to follow to prove the legitimacy of the investigation so that a judge can then sign off on it and they get their wiretap or they get their, or whatever infringes on your rights. Because to the judge, he needs a good reason. And it seems as though there was not a good enough reason presented to the judge in this situation. It's a hell of a ruling, because now it makes me question exactly, again, what was the basis of all the claims, all the implied claims against the former Commissioner of Police. We know what the rumors are, and I understand that. Yes, we all know what happened. Those who know. Unfortunately, when you are dealing with a democracy and a free country that is governed by the rule of law, you cannot just base your actions on rumor. So I understand what some people might think of Gary Griffith. I understand. Whether or not he's worthy to be the commissioner again, he should have been reappointed, or his continued public service is actually secondary to the basic point where, regardless of what we think about him, how we feel about him, and what we assume we know, it doesn't matter. With regards to the legal proceedings, it needs to be proven. We need to have evidence because, and this is what I think is happening abroad, if you skirt the rules, if you take shortcuts and you abuse the system to go after political opponents, it can happen back on you because nobody is in power. I know PNM has been, the government more often than not, but they are not always the government. It's not been 60 years straight of PNM. They've had some, NAR and UNC and People's Partnership in between. So if you do these things, it can be done back to you. And that's what I think is happening in certain foreign jurisdictions right now, and it's turning their legal system and justice system into something of a joke, if I'm honest. Now, with that said, we don't want such things to happen here. We already have issues with our criminal justice system, with our police service, with our judicial service, the judiciary. People are either not taking it seriously, think they're inept, because there's a reason why crime seems to be going rampant. As much as major crimes are going down, they are still high. And of course, the murder rate continues to be whatever it is. Even if it's less than last year, 600 instead of 612 or whatever. That's not an accomplishment. So we need to have cases like these, rulings like these, because if it ruled the other way, there would have been a lot of questions. Of course, Gary Griffith would have come out with a statement. He would have said some things. He would have made accusations. Some people would take him seriously. Some people wouldn't. But the point is, they would have further divided the country, split the country, and make our criminal justice system look even worse. Some might say, well, it's bad enough already. Yes, but it could get even worse. Once you set a precedent, people have a tendency to take that and roll with it. And it's one thing when the political parties will both kind of square off and go at tit for tat. It's another thing. People will see, hey, the leadership is like beyond corrupt. So why am I obeying the law? Why am I struggling? And we'll get to struggles in a little bit. Why am I struggling when it seems as though the powers that be, they're just kind of doing whatever they want? Now, an interesting thing coming from this case is the fact that there was a whistleblower that apparently informed Gary Griffith about the situation. And the whistleblower status is very interesting because of the regulations that the FIU operates under. The irony, of course, is the FIU director, I believe, also could not even speak upon the hearsay testimony given by the whistleblower because he himself could not confirm nor deny the information. So the judge was willing to take the whistleblower's testimony. I don't know if this part of the story is going to be going to grow into something more down the line. It's interesting that we have a whistleblower in this case. I would argue we don't have enough whistleblowers in this country. But there's questions with regards to the legality of even the whistleblower's testimony. Because FIU activities, you're not supposed to disclose. However, whistleblower legislation, I believe, should include something like that, because there will be situations where disclosure is technically against the law, but in the interest of public good, we, the public, might need to hear it. The flip side is, if the whistleblower is that altruistic, he's not necessarily going to care about the consequences, and potentially in this case, I don't know if the whistleblower is anonymous or not, but let's table that there. Let's move on to the next story. This one is going to be quick. Forex concerns continue, and that is, as businessmen point out to the fact and confirm the fact that a lot of our small businesses, small to medium businesses, use their credit cards to facilitate their international transactions. The new credit card limit is a problem. There are concerns, calls to the government to step in, to put things in place. Now, it's a catch-22, because apparently the government is saying the private sector needs to earn more foreign exchange, which is to some extent true, but as pointed out, as reported in the article, as said by one of the chambers, well, private businesses are going to hold on to their foreign exchange when there's a shortage, because it's not within their interest. This is a common enough complaint, I should say, that I've heard before. I earn foreign exchange. I need foreign exchange to continue conducting my business. But I am asking for less foreign exchange that I earn, but I am under the same restrictions as somebody else who does not earn foreign exchange. So I am bringing in, I am a net positive to foreign exchange, but you are restricting my business as much as somebody who is a net loss of foreign exchange. I've heard that enough times. I don't know if that has been rectified or not, but that is essentially, I believe, why businesses are not going to want to accept foreign currency, put it in local banks, and then have the banks tell them, well, there's a limit. Why? And there was that situation in Guyana where, yes, it was a response to the whole thing with what the Prime Minister said, blah, 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 blah. But the point is, he did mention Trinidadian businesses utilizing foreign exchange by making payments, I guess you could say, out of Guyana for whatever businesses they had to do. Because at the end of the day, to some extent, once you own the money, it doesn't necessarily matter where the money comes from. And if it's coming from Guyanese banks, it will affect their balance of trade, not ours. So he brought that up, which again shows both the need for Forex and the fact that the business community, well, they will keeping along. But given the fact that the limit has now decreased further, this is not the first time it's decreased, it's just a sign, even if we reach COVID recovery and we go back to pre-pandemic levels, this is an issue that was put on pause due to COVID. And now that we're somewhat getting back to where we were in 2019, start of 2020, those things, they weren't addressed. And I guess we were lucky enough to have the circumstances unfold in a way to wipe away those problems for us. So this is something that needs to be addressed, because I don't know if it's sustainable. It doesn't seem to be sustainable. And again, as my co-host Keita Shah keeps asking on Talking Point for the last couple of years, how is it that new businesses with foreign franchises, with foreign products, apparently somehow keeps being able to be opened? Is it with their own foreign exchange? If that is so, fine, let us know. But that's a concerning question. All right, moving on. Last one, just before the break. So the heat wave continues. It's a concern. It's a killer. I've literally had to limit the extent that I allow myself to be outdoors. It's affecting our water supply. It's caused WASA to have to reduce its production from the Hollis Reservoir. And this is at a time when already we have water issues because there was a fire. I believe last night it was reported the neighbors tried to use a bucket brigade based on water from barrels, if my understanding is correctly, and the implication is they did not have running water in the taps. So at some point, the bucket brigade came to an end before the fire was outed, and the fire then continued to rage. So we have this heat problem here. It's also affecting crops because agriculture, if it's going to affect the reservoir, it's affecting the water table of the country. It's going to affect just the water available in whatever the resources are for crops to grow. This is going to further impact our food issue. One could say perhaps now, if we have a prayer with agriculture and local agriculture, our water supply is even more important to get, I don't want to say the word fixed, but to try to keep up with demand as the country grows. And water parks need to take a step back, in my opinion, but that might be maybe too controversial, and the employees of those water parks might not want to hear that. But we have issues with water reservoirs, we have issues with crops, but I want to add a third thing, and that is with fires. Because all of us, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I just feel that there's a greater risk of fire because of the weather. The heat might be making, we normally a very humid country, making the weather drier, obviously hotter. There's enough wood in our construction that a lot of homes and even businesses, there was a business in Woodbrook years ago that got burned down. Even businesses, a supermarket, are at risk. And at a time when things are in flux, I don't know if we want to have to add one more thing, one more problem. So a fire service that will be able to operate, but again, it all comes back down now to water supply, which is directly being affected. So it's something to keep an eye on. In the meantime, folks, try and stay indoors, try and keep cool. I mean, this and all might make us need to rethink our architecture and how we design and build houses. Because I don't know if we have enough thought and effort put into natural ventilation and natural circulation. Things that existed for hundreds of years that we, I guess, don't seem to be using. We want to put fancy things like air conditioner and central air and central this, and insulate houses in a tropical climate. I know of one house that seems to be built that way. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue with the daily review here on Talking Point.
Bill and Ruth fell in love with the Benjamin Moore color Dry Sage, but they tried to match it using another brand's paint.
I mean, it's close enough.
Almost identical, really. Yeah, there it is.
Never trust another paint to be a Benjamin Moore color.
Let the home store turn your house into a home you love. Get everything you need to give your home that special look and feel. We offer household items, lawn and garden, paint center, hardware, plumbing, lighting and electrical, toys and storage solutions. 5 convenient locations: 6th Avenue Barataria, The Falls at Westmore, Pennywise Plaza Shoguanas, C3 Center Branch and C3 San Fernando. Check out our Facebook page for more information and come visit us today. The Home Store. Turn your house into a home you love.
You gave us the inspiration to be first. We gave you the solutions that put you first. You walked with us side by side, and we continued to serve you with pride. First Citizens celebrates with you 30 years of achieving dreams, shaping success stories, and painting brighter futures together. And together, we'll accomplish so much more. First Citizens, together, 30 and beyond.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Welcome back to Talking Point. Of course, the big story that I spoke about earlier was that the Commissioner of Police, the former Commissioner of Police, he won in court. Basically, the Financial Intelligence Unit was requesting information on his accounts and that of his wife. And a judge basically denied that request, stating that there was not enough evidence for, well, I'll put it in my words, it might be technically wrong, the reasons for the request. I think this is a big deal because it pokes holes, not necessarily completely cancels or disproves the implications implied by Mr. Griffith's political opponents. But it does poke holes and it does cause questions to be raised. And I would advise that we hold off and wait to see further how it continues to unfold, because again, this just shows that the government was not prepared, or the FIU, the financial judges, was not prepared, but we'll see, depending on if they have actual evidence to bring forward to continue their investigations. However, moving on with the daily review, we have the budget coming up in about less than 2 weeks, about 2 weeks. We've had some interesting commentary already coming from, well, of course, the opposition and the business community with regards to the budget. The opposition, of course, well, they want improved security, lower fuel prices, higher minimum wage. But one of the things that they mentioned was Nikwan's predicament, which I think is a reasonable request, because it seemed as though that was a preferred project, a preferred private project with, well, maybe a private-public partnership that seems to have so far been somewhat of a disaster. And I guess now risk assessment into could it ever become profitable or at least break even, because they need gas, they can't afford to pay for gas they've already accepted. They're under investigation for an accident that caused the death of one contractor. It's a bit of a mess. It's the second accident that they've had since their inception, which I believe might be in the span of 2 years, 2.5 years. It's a bit of a mess. But with regards to the budget, something that is interesting to me, and this is something I want to point out, I'm not necessarily saying that they were bad for saying this or for saying it this way, but this is an observation on the behavior of citizens when speaking to the government, because both the Faizabad Chamber and the Couva Chamber, they're calling for more investment in crime fighting and no more new taxes. Now, they are acknowledging the property taxes on the horizon, and they're not, I believe they're not saying no to the property tax being implemented. Although they did say that they would have hoped that it would have been like a lesser blow and gradually ramped up over time to the final result. But this is something, and I don't necessarily think that they themselves were phrasing it quite this way, but this is what it looks like, just in general, with a lot of complaints from the public. Spend more, earn less, tax less. Now, technically, a government's main source of revenue is taxes. A government is not great at for-profit enterprises. CAL, TSTT, I mean, public utilities aren't for-profit because government is technically the main source of their losses or their lack of profit or what's cutting into their revenue. But Petrotrin, right? Heritage, okay, might be making some money now, but it's not like the heyday. So we already have a bad track record of public entities or companies that are technically for profit, owned by the government, but then for various reasons, complications, social requirements that the government places on the company, whether warranted or not, these companies don't make a profit. So where does the government supposedly get its revenue from? Taxes. They tax the energy, the petrochemical industry, the oil and gas sector, etc., etc. They tax the citizens. Not every country has an oil and gas sector to tax. Of course, you tax businesses as well, right? The rest of the Caribbean doesn't have an oil and gas sector to tax, but somehow they keep going along with going along. So the basis of do more, spend more, but charge less, that is a very, dangerous thing if people kind of just brush aside in their complaints, well, you know, figure it out. Because what this is basically saying is don't charge more taxes. I get it. I understand why. There's nothing wrong with that. Spend more on crime. Again, nothing wrong with that. But putting those two things together, it means either you take out a loan, and crime fighting is not going to pay back the loan directly. So that's a tricky situation, right? Yes, it might help the economy, etc., but that's very indirect. So how are you going to justify that accounting-wise, calculate how much of a loan you could afford, what's the risk, blah, blah, blah. I don't know if things work quite that way. At least it won't be simple. Or you cut spending somewhere else. Now, technically, I have brought into question, and callers as well have brought into question, certain national security apparatus that aren't working. Why are we spending money there? Not firemen who are waiting on fire tenders, not those. Other aspects of the national security apparatus which could be used in national security. However, truth be told, that's more of an emotional response. The proper response is those issues should be fixed. So we can't really cut that. So what we're going to cut? We're going to cut spending money on roads, we're going to cut spending money on schools, we're going to cut spending money on utilities at WASA. What are we going to cut? We're going to cut housing, we're going to cut grants. What are we going to cut? And the reason why I think it is legitimate to ask that question for the people that say, well, increase crime fighting spending, no more taxes, is because whatever the government cuts is going to be unpopular. Fuel subsidy. You want the fuel subsidy back, you want lower gas prices, we need the fuel subsidy. Where's that money coming from? What are you going to cut? We don't have the money anymore to waste on bringing Shaq on a basketball court. Right? So where's it going to come from? I mean, yes, the cynics will say reduce corruption, that will free up some money. How much money could it possibly free up? If it's that much money, well, it might be that much money. But even then, we're not really doing anything about that as a voting population, are we? So what do we want? What do we want to cut? That I think is what it comes down to. Everybody that wants something from the government right now, because every government ministry, public entity, special purpose company, they want money from the government. So we as the public, it's fine that we say we want this as the priority. And I'm not saying we have to figure out what to cut, but I'm just saying if the government says we will listen to you and spend more money on crime fighting without increasing taxes, don't complain when we cut something. Because that's how budgets work. New money just doesn't appear. So that's just something I wanted to point out. I have many criticisms for the government, but we have to be fair. When we ask for more without giving something ourselves. So they could do it. But you might lose something that you might not want to lose, or you think you might not want to lose, or you think you might need. But what is our priorities as citizens? We need to send a proper message to our politicians. Otherwise, we can't blame them for running around in circles. Last story here. And this I find kind of hilarious. And this, again, goes to what we were speaking about yesterday with the ASP. A man was arrested during COVID. He and 4 friends were speaking. They were, I believe, they were practicing social distancing, so I assume that means they were about 5 feet apart from each other. It was 4 of them. The police came up. They said, you can't be talking. They said, well, hold on. We are socially distant. We are less than 5. We are having a conversation. And, well, the gentleman who I believe was speaking up against the police, he was arrested. Eventually, he appeared in court, and I think it was that the prosecutors failed to appear, or the police prosecutor, or the evidence, or they just, the prosecution of the case more or less just stopped, and he was eventually awarded with $102,000 for wrongful arrest. So that's $102,000 that did not need to go out. In the grand scheme of a $40 to $50 billion budget, it might seem like a drop in the bucket, but how many of these things happens, right? But it also goes to the professionalism of the TTPS, who, if you had it right on the arrest, why wasn't he prosecuted? And the thing is, he was arrested for resisting arrest, and it always irks me when police say you're doing something wrong and we're going to arrest you, and then you resist because in your mind you're not doing anything wrong, and then the charge that you get is resisting arrest. And it doesn't necessarily confirm this, but what is in the article, I could only assume, and I'm willing to make the assumption right now, they didn't charge him for breaching COVID health regulations, perhaps. I could be wrong about that. But again, you're charged for resisting arrest. Well, I'm arguing my rights here based on the publicized public health regulations. So that's the other thing with regards to the law. But I have to warn people, even if you know the law front and back, cover to cover, of whatever section it is that deals with a situation that you might find yourself with a police officer coming and telling you you're in breach of the law, you're in violation of the law, please understand, do not escalate the situation. Don't do it. Regardless of how right you are, don't do it. It will be better for everybody if you don't, because then now the situation can get out of hand. And you yourself might be in trouble in more ways than one. If you, with your attitude, with your body language, with your demeanor, and with your actions in particular, cause the situation to go beyond where it needs to be. Sometimes it's just say, all right, okay, let them take you in, let them take you to the station. I know it's an inconvenience, but it's safer that way. And if they go too far, $100,000 right there. But consider your safety and the safety of everybody involved. Because the situation can get out of hand in many ways. And I don't want to list all of them. I'll leave that there. Let's take a break. When we come back, something came up about the education situation last week. We have some changes on the horizon. Talks are happening this week. So we're going to talk about it and let you know, if you haven't seen this press conference, let you know where potentially you might be able to engage with the talks, hear what the Ministry of Education has to say for the next 5 years. Stay tuned to Talking Point on WSN. We'll be right back.
If these walls could talk, they'd cry uncle. They didn't plan to become offices or yoga studios. But they've stood by us, even when we got a little stir-crazy. For that, they deserve some thanks. They deserve Benjamin Moore.
Let the home store turn your house into a home you love. Get everything you need to give your home that special look and feel. We offer household items, lawn and garden, paint center, hardware, plumbing, lighting and electrical, toys and storage solutions. 5 convenient locations: 6th Avenue Barataria, The Falls at Westmore, Pennywise Plaza Shoguanas, C3 Center Branch and C3 San Fernando. Check out our Facebook page for more information and come visit us today. The Home Store. Turn your house into a home you love.
From Maracas Bay to Arafita Avenue and Piaco, Richard's Bake and Shark brings the world's most popular fish sandwich closer to you. Open daily at all our locations.
You gave us the inspiration to be first. We gave you the solutions that put you first. You walked with us side by side, and we continued to serve you with pride. First Citizen celebrates with you 30 years of achieving dreams, shaping success stories, and painting brighter futures together. And together, we'll accomplish so much more. First Citizens, together, 30 and beyond.
Every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. A father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
The education system is now poised for transformative action, which has already begun and will continue based on implementation of the initiatives outlined in the Education Policy 2023-27 and its accompanying sub-policies. The initiatives outlined in the Education Policy 2023-27 also dovetail with the recommendations of the SEA and Concordat Committee, which indicated that a drastic change in the format used to effect transition from primary to secondary school would likely result in negative unintended consequences without reform of the education system to increase the homogeneity of educational experiences across primary and secondary schools. The committee recommended changes to the education system to ensure that the quality of education could be achieved in any school in Trinidad and Tobago would be superior. This echoes the vision of the Education Policy 2023-27, which is modern, relevant, equitable education for all. The committee proposed a general enhancement program at the elementary level, which was proposed to reduce the levels of underachievement prior to students reaching the transition point to head into secondary school. And that would support the improvement strategies at the secondary school level. The Education Policy 2023-27 is in accord with the suggestions and presents multifaceted solutions across 8 strategic areas. It underscores the importance of legislative updates, which is the amendment of the Education Act, human resource development, equity in quality education, curricular reform, revitalization of TVET, or technical and vocational education and training, harnessing ICT for digital transformation, transitioning learners through the education system, and enabling student success. The sub-policies which support the education policy address in more specific detail the recommendations of the SEA Concordat Committee. Critical to the success of the implementation of the tenets of the education policy, which would be evidenced by the gradual transformation of the education sector, is inclusive stakeholder engagements. EduTalk, the series of education conversations which take place next week, is meant to engage our stakeholders on our strategic plan to transform education. On Monday, 18th September, we engage all principals at the Southern Academy of the Performing Arts on the following topics: education policy, cultural transformation policy, patriotism policy, digital transformation updates, re-engaging for success, integrated school monitoring policy, and restorative practice and student support services division functions. On Tuesday 19th and Wednesday 20th September, we engage in national community at Carripachaima West and El Dorado West secondary schools. On Thursday, we will have an open virtual session, and on Friday 22nd September, we close with a student forum. Members of the public are asked and invited to follow the MOE on our social media platforms and contribute to the discussion as we collaboratively transform education in Trinidad and Tobago. One of the most impactful sub-policies which is currently being implemented is the cultural transformation through education policy. The main initiatives include the introduction of mandatory school activities, which is taking place in this academic year, curricular changes, timetable changes, changes in the student assessment framework, and changes in school operations. This must be accompanied by buy-in. Our principals have already been involved via 4 seminars which were held, and the effects of what we are doing now we expect to be seen over the course of 5 to 7 years. So we invite the national public to join with us as we enter this series of talks, EduTalk, to discuss how we are going to work together to transform education in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you.
That was the Minister of Education, Nanda Gatsby-Dolly, and she was speaking last week, Friday. That means that, of course, these talks, they're occurring this week. Of course, there was one yesterday for principals. There will be one open to the public at El Dorado West today. Let me just double check. And it's from, Caripachaima West Secondary School today, Tuesday the 19th, 6 p.m. to 8:30 p.m., right? I believe, well, come and ask your questions and hear what they have to say, because I think this is important. I believe the education system has been a bit of a problem. One of the things that the changes, where the changes have come from, they've come from recommendations of education consultations from 2020 to 2021, as well as, of course, feedback from stakeholders, but most importantly, what was said at the Caribbean Crime Symposium. Some of what was said there was taken by the Ministry of Education and was considered with regards to what is supposed to be a 5-year plan from 2003 to 2007. So I assume it would be the year of 2027, to 2028. So that 5-year plan, 2023 to 2027, they want to revamp the education system. They want to do a lot with it. My question is, to what extent will they be able to implement some of these things properly? The key thing that you said there was the homogeneity of education, which I find interesting, because the goal, and I don't know to what extent we should hold the Ministry of Education to this, but the goal would be to try to get a high quality of education across the board, right? In order to treat with the inequity or inequality of opportunities of quality education. That's why people rush in for certain schools, private schools, prestige schools. And of course, it brings questions, well, what happens to those that aren't able to do these things, to go to these types of schools, to have these types of opportunities? That's a tall order to try to get all of your schools up. The risk, of course, depending on how you implement it, is, say, okay, we want to improve education across the board. Well, homogeneity could also come in the form of, well, we want to average out education across the board, which means that we will, try to spread our resources so that the schools that are doing good, they might get less of whatever it is, quality teachers, whatever it is, right? They might get less. Their averages, their scores might come closer to the mean, so that more could be invested in the schools that are under the average that needs to be brought up. That's what it could also look like. I assume that's not what the minister means, because she points out a high quality education for all. But this is important because, of course, every year we have the SEA exam, and every year it's a bit of a controversy depending on the results and the stress it puts the students through and what this could mean for the rest of their lives, an exam that they have to take when you're 11 years old. So for more on the SEA, we have another clip here of the minister answering a question. Let's run this clip.
When the report of the SEA Concordat Committee, which was put in place by the Prime Minister, is released, then you would see a bit more in terms of their level of consultation, who they spoke with, what they spoke about, and the outcome of the discussion. But in general, the outcome that they are recommending is that we may be better served by moving to a different system. However, at this time, we have bigger issues to deal with, which would be the equity of education. And that means that we have to deal with ensuring that no matter where a student goes to school, they can receive quality education, and that there are standards that would apply to what every student should be exposed to. Because what is expressed in the report is that even if we were to move to different systems that have been tried in different educational jurisdictions, there are inherent consequences that may be unintended, but that may serve to concentrate students even more than it is now in certain areas based on geography, based on the type of school they attend, and it will not give us the result we are looking for. So what they actually suggested is that we do exactly what this education policy speaks to, taking a deep dive into our education system and the quality of education that is offered. And in that way, when students are assured of a quality education wherever they are, it will remove this one competition and this need to get students into a particular school if they are to do well. That is at the basis of the queries that come with SEA, and so that is where we are focusing the attention first, dealing with what is offered across the board at all our schools.
On the surface, that seems extremely reasonable to me. The issue is not the exam. The exam is the medium to carry out the function which I think some parents have an issue with, and that is who gets to go to the good schools and who has to end up in the bad schools. And the problem will exist no matter what system you have. No matter what system you have. What also then complicates our education system is we have government assisted schools that's basically run by religious bodies. They tend to be, at least with some of the Hindu schools, some of the Catholic schools, some of the better schools in the country, right? And I guess the way to solve the issue is not to do away with the exam. Because the problem is when you have too much demand for too few places, some of the other schools don't have that much demand for, right? Or depending on other circumstances, all things being equal, there's going to have to be some way to give out the spots. You can't just accept everybody into prestige schools. There's not enough space. The fact of the matter is, even, I believe, primary schools have become competitive, right? They interview you, they examine the child, they see what their capabilities are, etc., etc. And some primary schools, especially private ones, they are, what's the word? Well, they are selective. There's criteria. Now it's a whole thing with regards to daycare for preschoolers to have a whole set of extra, almost curriculum work. We're talking 2- and 3-year-olds in order to prep them to be ready to go to primary school. The education system becomes that competitive because the standard across the board is not high. It's only high in certain places. So the minister's theory, I think, is correct. The idea is to try to improve the education system in areas where the quality is in doubt, questioned, or objectively bad. And then we can get, we can then consider what could we have besides SEA in order to place people. Where it could be based on other things that make more sense as opposed to, well, I need to get my child in a good school. So I'm going to have him drill for 2 years with practice papers, etc., etc., and his whole school career is now this one big competition, which puts a lot of stress and strain on young people who don't necessarily even understand at the age of 11 years old what that means. Some kids at 15, 16, 17 don't even understand what their CAPE results, what their CAPE exams mean, what university education means, what they want to do with the rest of their life. It's kind of silly to think we're going to put all of that, we're going to start that pressure on a primary school student. My one exception to this, and it goes back to that term, homogeneity. to make it equitable. Now, how the ministry use equity in this case? I don't necessarily like the use of the word sometimes. It's very political. But in this case, it's not trying to get the results the same, but I believe trying to get the quality of education the same to give the students the best chance to achieve on their own merits. Of course, they still have to put in the work themselves. But the key point with why I'm concerned about the use of the word homogeneity, well, we spoke to one Judith de Vertile here, I believe last year, and she made a good case about the fact that some students, they learn differently than others. The techniques that's used traditionally in the classrooms that many of us might have, had to learn from, it doesn't necessarily work for all students, and that could have been why, I'm sure you would have known, I would have known some students who were struggling, some students who tried hard and were still struggling. They didn't necessarily seem dumb, they didn't necessarily seem incapable, and they were putting in the effort, but they were struggling. So that's the concern. If the education system continues to be a one-size-fits-all, wrong peg, wrong holes, that's it, that's all we account for situation. Of course, even if we take my concerns into consideration, but probably with my concerns, budget is still going to be the problem. Digital transformation or digitization of schools, that's a big deal. That's going to require a lot of capital. But she also mentioned mandatory activities, which I agree with, but again, I'm not going to sit here and say it's going to be easy to put these things in place, because mandatory activities, from what I understand, these are extra curriculum, whether it's music, whether it's sports, whether it's going on outings, what have you. Other ways for students to gain experience and learn outside of an academic classroom setting, great, but the implementation requires resources. I don't know where these resources are coming from, so I have concerns, but I would like to see these things done. I would like to see digital blackboards or digital screens for teachers to teach from in all schools. That would be great. That would help expose kids that don't have access to it at home to computer technology sooner in a much more thorough way. I would love to see more activities for schools. If you watch foreign media with certain countries where they're chopping away at non-academic activities, that has had certain implications to the education system, so I'd like to see more of that. I'm just concerned with the implementation. It all comes back down to implementation. And if we'll have the budget to do what we need to do. And as I said earlier, if we want to prioritize this, what are we willing to sacrifice? Are we willing to sacrifice the price of gas? Are we willing to sacrifice more taxes? Are we willing to sacrifice a grant or two? That's something that we, the voters, need to figure out. If we want to not, what do we want? They can only give us what we want if we tell them. And we have to figure that out. We have a break for news. When we come back, we have the phone lines. I'm interested if anyone wants to speak further about this education topic and my concerns. Just remember again, today and tomorrow, there are community meetings at Carpachima West, 6 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. and El Dorado. Carpachima West and El Dorado West. Carpachina is today, El Dorado West is tomorrow, 6 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. Let's take a break, we'll be right back.
Here is the WESN News on the Hour. I am Sarah Ali. Thanks for joining us. Here are the headlines. MV Cabo Star completes repairs, awaits certification for resumption of operations. Education Minister urges media to shift focus to student achievement amidst ongoing challenges. Police Welfare Association urges vigilance among officers following the tragic murder of an SRP. And internationally, Australian man fined for taking his pet snake surfing. Now for the detail. The Port Authority has announced the successful completion of repair works on the MV Cabo Star, which recently experienced a fire incident. The vessel, now in the final stages of readiness, is pending inspection by the Classification Society. RENA, scheduled for Monday. The outcome of this inspection will determine the vessel's certification for space operations, after which it is expected to return to its regular schedule. The fire incident occurred on Wednesday, August 23rd, at approximately 11:23 p.m., shortly after the MV Cabo Star had departed from the port of Scarborough, Tobago. Quick response and effective action by the crew members led to the isolation and subsequent extinguishing of the fire. Fortunately, no injuries were reported among the passengers and crew on board during the incident. With the impending inspection by RENA, stakeholders and passengers eagerly await the vessel's certification for safe operations. The Minister of Education, Dr. Nayan Gasmudoli, has called upon the media to redirect its attention towards what she characterizes as more profound and critical aspects, particularly student achievement. This appeal comes in light of concerns that media coverage primarily centers around issues related to failing school infrastructure and incidents of indiscipline and fights within the schools. Dr. Gasbidoli made these remarks during the launch of Edu Talks, a talk forum initiated by the Ministry of Education aimed at facilitating discussions with various stakeholders within the education system. Her statements, however, comes just a day after a distressing incident involving 4 students from Arangwe's North Secondary. Gideon Dixon, the head of the Police Welfare Association, issued a poignant advisory today to members of the police service, emphasizing the need for vigilance both while conducting their duties and during their off-duty hours. This cautionary message follows the tragic murder of a fellow officer, Special Reserve Police Officer Charles Kubal Singh. Kubal Singh, who was on extended leave at the time of the incident, was fatally shot in the chest with a 12-gauge shotgun less than 3 minutes after leaving his home on Saturday night. The 56-year-old officer had requested leave from his police duties after he became a crucial witness in an ongoing murder case in which one of his former superiors was charged. The Police Welfare Association's president, in an interview, said this tragedy serves as a reminder of the need for heightened security measures and awareness among officers, both on and off duty. Internationally, a Gold Coast man who filmed himself taking his pet snake for a surf has been fined by Australian wildlife authorities. Eagle and his Bradley carpet python, Shiva, became local celebrities earlier this month after a video of them catching waves went viral. But their short-lived fame also tipped off wildlife protection officers. They say the man endangered Shiva and breached his permit to keep the snake by taking her out in public. Queensland's Department of Environment and Science says it began investigating the surfing duo after Mr. Eagle appeared in local media and this week issued him a fine of $2,322. Wildlife Officer Jonathan McDonald said in his statement, "Taking native pets out in public can cause them unnecessary stress and can make them behave in an unpredictable way." Well, that's news to the hour on WESN. I'm Sarah Ali. Thanks for watching.
We exposed 5 strangers to KFC's delicious chicken to see if any time could be KFC time. And at the first bite, the party began. We repeated the experiment during the day, during business hours, on weekends, with sunshine, with rain. And it's confirmed. KFC's flavor makes anytime KFC time. KFC, it's finger licking good.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, The Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com. Of course, I was just speaking before the break about the EduTalk series that the Ministry of Education is going to hold all this week. Tonight and tomorrow night, Carpechama West tonight, 6 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. Tomorrow, Carpechama West. Tomorrow, El Dorado West, 6 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. Thursday, there's an open virtual session, a live stream. That's from 7 p.m. to 8:45 p.m. I would still recommend trying, if possible, to go to the live events at Carpechama West and El Dorado West today and tomorrow. Live events where you could speak in person in the community forums to hear what they have to say and also to give feedback, more importantly. But now we open up the phone lines and we have our first caller, hot and ready. San Fernando, you're on the air. Good morning.
Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
It is so interesting that you put two topics on the front burner this morning. The foreign exchange issue and the education issue. For both of them are related. I think the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago need, and you were alluding to it and you were getting there, so you didn't have enough time. And citizens of Trinidad and Tobago need to understand, or to be made to understand, how their lives impact the foreign exchange issue in Trinidad and Tobago. Their everyday life, how it impacts the foreign exchange issue. From us going to get a fast food in one of those franchises, to cooking and putting salt on your table. Salt. They do not understand how much money, how much foreign exchange it takes to feed this country because of how we eat, one, and some of the basic items that we don't produce. I could, Sean, there is nothing in Trinidad and Tobago that isn't impacted by foreign exchange. There is no job in this country that is not impacted by foreign exchange, and they need to understand that. And as time goes by, and our GDP per capita falls, just as you're saying, things have to be given up.
Yes.
And they need to understand that. Let me say this. We operated on a GDP of around $19,000 US per capita. Jamaica is 5,600, Sean. Look at Jamaica's economy. Look at the day-to-day lives of Jamaicans and how hard life is in Jamaica. And let them understand that, do you want to deal with this? Now, segueing into the education system, I have a real problem with Miss Marianne Gatsby-Dolly. The first thing is you're having a consultation before, but you're not releasing. You should have released that report first. Let us see what is in that report, because one of my issues is that the state has failed in their ability to run a proper education system. What has happened is the denominational schools are the ones that everybody wants to go to. The Presbyterian colleges,
yes,
the Hindu colleges, the Muslim colleges, the Catholic colleges. Those are the forefront schools. So they are doing something different to what is taking place in the other system. And let us look at that. I am saying the state needs to take a step back and probably give, as an example, give the Catholic schools, give them some of the schools, give those the denominational schools, say, okay, you take two, and allow them, with some funds, of course, to bring back those schools. Because I'm telling you, all the national schools are not getting what they need in terms of funding, you know. And those schools are funded by those organizations and the parents. There is something when that child goes to those schools that the school forces the parent to get involved, and that is what makes a better school. It's the school management, the teachers, the principals, the nominational institutions. This thing with one size fits all, it is not going to work, Sean. I am telling you, it is not going to work. And we have to understand that, for instance, we move out trade schools, right?
Yes.
Our secondary school system, where we had those were fit for purpose in terms of trying to the junior secondary and the senior comprehensive school. It was trying to create a technical college. That was way ahead of its time, and that needs to come back because they say everybody learns differently. Sean, I went to one of those secondary schools and senior comprehensive schools. When I left that school at 16 years old, Sean, I was able to read a blueprint. I am talking about a technical blueprint for a building. I was able to do that. There are so many things that laid the foundation for me. However, you have to have involvement. You had, in those days, we had parents. My parents were involved in the PTA. I mean, really involved in the PTA. So there are things that we have to look at, and this one-size-fits-all is not going to work.
Well,
I'll give it to other callers.
Thank you, Simon. The one thing is, though, I don't know exactly how much it's going to be a one-size-fits-all, although that seems to be, as you rightfully pointed out, the way where education systems are going in certain countries, ours included, right? As you lament the fact that, you know, trade schools are kind of falling off the wayside. People are so concerned about essentially white-collar type careers, you know, lawyer, accountant, actuary, doctor, dentist, CEO even, business degree, what have you. And simple things like plumbing, carpentry. I remember years ago reading a story about somebody who was highly educated in some academic field or business field, what have you. Some executive person, they lost their job, or management person, they lost their job, and they picked up elevator repair. This is, of course, in a different country. They picked up elevator repair, and they were making potentially just as much, if not better, money, and they didn't necessarily have the same kinds of stress that their previous career had. So, you know, while I'm not necessarily saying that elevator repairmen could all be that way, we don't have the same number of elevators, and we don't have multiple skyscrapers and stuff like that in TNT. But at the end of the day, there's always the need for services of a good plumber, of a good carpenter, and depending, and perhaps, you know, prices all are at a balance point. If you're really good, you could demand a decent amount, a reasonable but yet still decent amount of money for your services, and people will be willing to pay for it to get that good service. But again, good service in this country is not something that intersects very often. But you made a point about PTA involvement. One of the things, I don't want to be too harsh on parents in modern society, but one of the things that is an unfortunate reality of 2023 and living in these times is people tend to be too busy, right? Now for a middle-income household, mommy and daddy has to work. And it makes things more difficult to be involved in the PTA. Not impossible though, because I've had a member of a PTA who has a full-time career, mother of 3, on this show, so it can be done. But, you know, it just all depends. I think with prestige schools, one of the things that they have it easier to get parents involved is the prestige schools could basically say, look, this is what we need to give the child the education you expected to be here. And it's not as though, not that the schools are going to say this. The schools are just going to say this is what we need. The parents are going to understand the implication of there isn't really any other alternative. There's no next level to go up. This is potentially as far as our education system goes. So, If we need to get involved, we need to get involved. And I think perhaps, this is just a theory, maybe parents of a junior sec or senior comprehensive these days, because of the stigma and because of the belief that, oh, you know, it's not as good, whatever, I don't know if they give the school's administration the weight, the consideration, give their words any weight with regards to how much they could help, how much they need to do to help, etc., etc. Of course, also, there is a socio-economic dimension I don't want to get into with regards to that discussion because it's going to be complicated. I don't want to make a mess of it now. But there's a socio-economic dimension with regards to that discussion. Who has funds available, etc., blah, blah, blah. And then it leads into other implications that I don't want to get into right now. I want to stick with the fact that the education system is supposed to be looking to have incremental changes, and one of the questions is if we could get those changes done, because where is the money coming from? The education system already in debt, whether we know it or not. Just ask MTS, just ask AFCL. Folks, the numbers are at the bottom of your screen. Call in, let us know what you think. There's a lot of things to unpack with regards to the news coming out of yesterday. I do think that this situation with Gary Griffith is very interesting to see. I'm actually kind of surprised that it was allowed to get to that point where the judge basically said, you're not really presenting me with enough to allow this case to go through, to allow his rights to be infringed. We have Sanfan on the line again.
Sean, I wanted to engage you because I just realized that we didn't have some callers, and so let me engage you again. You talked about two things. You talked about plumbing and elevator repair, right? Mm-hmm. Let me just show you how a technical education fits into where we are. That shipyard that is in Chagaramas, that they have the floating dock sank and they need to buy a new floating dock. Do you know ships need industrial plumbers? Sean, our education system, when it was set out in the 70s, when Dr. Williams started to build these secondary schools, Dr. Williams had a vision that was not, I think the population couldn't see the vision. It was way ahead of its time. But if you look at South Korea, the South Korean economy, Sean, look at the Singapore economy, look at the German economy. Those are economies that are built on technical education, you know, Sean. Technical education. Those people, with Germany building the best cranes, South Korea building ships, South Korea have, some of the biggest refrigeration companies, Samsung and those other companies. These are technical education. That is where it starts. And we have to, somehow, they have to bring this to fruition. Because, okay, we may not be able to go to those heights. However, if we educate the population, we have a certain level of technically competent people in the country. Just like we have doctors and we have lawyers and we have those accountants and those things, and you balance it out. We now can export, or we can import companies that understand this country has the skill set, and let us go and set up there. And this is where, again, the population needs to be educated and to see the potential of where we can go if it is that we change the system and they also get involved. I don't want to be dead there, Sean. I want to hear you.
Okay. Well, the one thing with that is it also brings up the question of culture. And we've had this discussion on Talking Point before. How could we change TNT without losing what makes us Trinbagonians? Right? That's the end of the day. The real difference between us and, say, South Korea, Germany, Singapore. Because with that, it's not just the technical skill, but it's also the seriousness, I guess, is one way to put it, of how they approach things. That's why, precision, but also rigidity in some ways to certain rules, to certain cultural norms, to certain expectations. Some of it has its good points. High production, high productivity. Some of it has its bad points, with regards to stress levels, with regards to burnout, with regards to borderline inhumane expectations. So how do we get to a more productive phase? Because culturally, the laissez-faire lackadaisical culture that we have does not necessarily lend itself always to that level or something similar to what you see in places like Singapore and South Korea. But the key point is we don't want to, one, lose what makes us Trimegonians, and two, end up having some of the same negative consequences of that type of work culture and lack of work-life balance in a lot of cases if we, to go that route, to try to achieve something along those lines. So, but it's interesting to point out, I do think though with the education system, part of the problem is as it grows bigger, the situation becomes more complex and complicated. And that is part of governance and good governance too now. You have it, you establish it, but as it grows, can you keep maintaining it? Not just as it is, but as it grows, we keep adding more schools, we keep making the situation more complex. We have a caller from Shogunas. Good morning. Caller, you on the air?
Hello?
Hi, morning, you on the air?
Hello? Yes. You keep on talking about Singapore and different culture and whatnot. I explained that to you before, that when Trinidad and Singapore got independence at about the same time, and Singapore had by far greater problems than Trinidad. They had a crime problem, they had a drug problem, they had a cleanliness problem. And what they did, just like Trinidad, what Williams did, they passed appropriate laws. The difference was that Singapore up to now enforces these laws and from experience keep reviewing it. Ours, on the other hand, was sabotaged by Johnny O'Halloran and these guys, and since then we are not enforcing our laws and improving the laws by way of our annual administrative reports. Right? And the solution was there, that we was there. And we have to find out why. We said causing the problem with what I explained to you last week, all these things. We do not follow the principles of good governance. Any question today?
No questions, but thank you for reminding me of that point, because it goes further. And I forgot about it, so thank you. Because, yes, our easygoing culture, I think, is part of the reason why we have this lack of law and order. Because I think on some level, let's park on the Eastern Main Road, let's throw out the cigarette butts on the road, let's ignore this little law, that little law, and then it turns into ignoring a slightly bigger law, and then it turns into, well, if you do this way, you could avoid paying taxes on that. And we're not talking about a legal way, we're talking about illegal way. And then it continues, and it's small corruption. And then for some people, it turns into big corruption. And then, of course, now you're seeing these things happening, so the politicians, they start to turn a blind eye. And then some of them start to get involved. And the police, they start to turn a blind eye. And then some of them, they start to get involved. So the easygoing culture, it's a blessing and a curse. Just like the hard-working culture of South Korea can be a blessing and a curse. There's pros and cons. Not everybody, I think, has gotten a great balance. There's pros and cons to every culture. But I think for us here, with regards to our specific issues right now, we do need to make an adjustment. We want to still keep the easygoing atmosphere when it's time to relax, when it's time to kick back. And in some professional settings, some amount of it might even be good. You don't necessarily want to be all stuck up on whatever. But there are times they get serious with regards to our laws, with regards to enforcing them, with regards to maintaining order, with regards to respecting the authority. If the authority makes a bad law, immoral law, unconstitutional law, you still respect the offices of states, the mechanisms of state, and you proceed to try to correct what you perceive as a mistake or a flaw in the correct way. You don't just boil down the place and mash up the place until you potentially get the change that you want. We don't have that. So we don't have that respect, and now we have a lot of problems because we've allowed what is a quirk of our culture. It's not really a negative, you know. It's just a quirk. But we've allowed it to snowball into an issue today. That's what I think. I don't know if anybody disagrees with me, but we don't have time to hear from your disagreements because we're more or less out of time. So it's just something to think about. Again, the consultations, the community meetings are happening in Carpetchama West, El Dorado West, 6 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. Carpetchama is tonight. El Dorado West is tomorrow night. And then Thursday, there's going to be a live stream open virtual session from 7 to 8:45 p.m. Friday, there's student consultation. I'm not too sure. They didn't have a time on that. I could find a time for that. I do believe that will be done somewhat internally. That is to say, schools will determine representatives and send them to the forum for that day. However, the timetable is structured. But these are things that we need more involvement in. As one of the callers said, involvement in the PTA. Well, involvement here as well. As the education system is changing, I don't have a child, so I don't necessarily have not just a reason to go, but more importantly, I don't have direct experience with the education system, so I'm not going to know what you're going through. Parents, you have to go. Those of you that have issues, you have to go. I could go and I could kind of try to go with what I know based on what people tell me, but that's not going to be good enough. That's not going to be good enough, especially if you have major issues with the education system. Go now. Tonight, tomorrow night, have your say, because the lack of engagement could cause the government to pick a course that you will then disagree with after the fact, but what they could do then. We can't just wait on everybody before changes are made. I would argue the education system needs changes now. I don't know if these are going to be right ones, so I advise people to go and have their say, take a look. In the meantime, be careful of the heat. Be careful about going outside. If you have to go outside, if you have to spend long periods outside, make sure to stay hydrated. And with everything I've said here today, it all comes down to the fact, folks, you are the voters, you are the government's boss, whichever party is in power. You need to educate yourselves more on what you need to know. You don't know what you don't know. I don't know what I don't know, so always keep trying to learning and educate yourselves and be more active in the leadership of your own country in order to make today or tomorrow a good day. But today starts with you, so make it a good day. You could do it if you try, as my course always says, and we'll see you tomorrow morning. Goodbye.